Chapter 14, Emotional and Social Development in Early Adulthood. Emerging adulthood. This discusses the slower route to full adulthood that young people in the United States and similar Western countries experience. The reason that adulthood emerges slowly rather than starting immediately when somebody turns 18 or 21 is because here in the United States, it takes longer to establish oneself economically and in terms of career. And so people tend to take longer pursuing higher education, exploring different possibilities in terms of career, as well as taking that time to explore personal values and likes and dislikes, etc. People vary a great deal in terms of the timing of taking on full adult responsibilities, as well as their order. Some people choose a very planned out path of finishing education, establishing a career, and then establishing a family. Some people go straight to work after finishing high school and perhaps go back to school later once they've decided what they wish to study. Some people start a family right away and then need to establish themselves economically right away and go back to school later. So there are different paths, different timing, different order. All of this helps people develop a more complex self-concept. Identity development continues to require exploration. People who go in depth, people who choose something to pursue, a goal to pursue in early adulthood, tend to have higher self-esteem and to be doing better. Although some breadth is important to make sure you've made the right decisions, you need some exploration, but too much breadth suggests diffusion of identity. And as we saw, a diffuse identity is associated with poorer adjustment and possibly mental health problems. Okay, religion and emerging adulthood. We're not going to go into this in too much depth, but just to point out that this is a time period, adolescence and adulthood, where people spend less time associated with formal religion. Children tend to pursue the religious interests and beliefs of their parents, and in later adulthood, especially after a family is established, many people return to religious practice. But the late teens and 20s are a time when people are not as focused in general on religious practice. However, the United States is a place where religion is very important to many young people, more so than in other Western countries such as Western Europe, Canada, Australia, etc. And 1 in 4 U.S. 18 to 29-year-olds, however, says that they are not affiliated with any particular faith. Okay. Worldview and emerging adulthood. This is talking about some common beliefs about the current generation of young people. We hear a lot about how the current generation is very self-focused, narcissistic, and in particular materialistic, very focused on money and things. On the one hand, we can point to many examples where this is true, and American society in general has become very money-focused, very materialistic. On the other hand, there is evidence that the current age group of young adults, that's called a cohort, an age group at one point that has something in common at one point in time is called a cohort, that these people are heavily involved in volunteering, in community service, and many of them choose to vote and have become increasingly politically involved. All of these things are associated with less self-focus and more community focus. Cultural change. Why does the beginning of adulthood now take longer than it did in the past? Well, in part, entry-level jobs require more education than they used to. Wealth and longevity, meaning the United States has many, many people who have a lot of money. We're a wealthy country. Of course, we also have a great deal of difference between rich and poor in America, but there are many people who have access to money And because they know they're going to live longer, we have increased longevity in this country. It leaves people free to put off immediately entering work. What does this mean? It means that emerging adulthood is largely limited to industrialized countries, well-off countries like ours, and in developing countries, only the wealthy are able to delay adulthood in this way. Okay. This slide is talking about an emotional quality called resilience. What does it mean to be resilient? It means bouncing back, facing problems head on, being a problem solver, a good coper with stress, and somebody who is able to bounce back from disappointments. Resilience is a good thing for anyone to have. And how do we encourage resilience in young adults? There are cognitive attributes to resilience. In other words, the way you think about things, the way you approach problems. If you approach problems as a challenge, something that I'm going to overcome, that's a quality that's associated with resilience. There are emotional attributes. A person needs to be emotionally stable, and able to come back from crises, not to fall apart in a crisis. It has social attributes, social support. Being part of a supportive group increases resilience. Okay. When we left people in adolescence, Erickson said that the primary goal of adolescence was to form an identity. Once an identity is formed, Erickson believed, this prepares the way for the next important personal attribute to develop in adulthood, which is intimacy. The ability, to make a permanent commitment to an intimate partner, to form your own relationship, perhaps leading up to starting a family. Now, why do you need identity? Why do you need to know who you are in order to find an intimate partner? Because intimacy, building a relationship, involves giving up some independence. And when you give up independence, when you compromise with another person, you need to sometimes redefine your identity. Redefine your identity by including this other important person. So people who have an insecure identity are often afraid to make that commitment. They worry that if they choose one partner, that they'll get swallowed up in that other person's life. Whereas somebody who's secure in their own identity can make that commitment, and they can choose well. They know who and what they're looking for. And it's associated with fidelity, with sticking with one partner, with being faithful. Somebody who goes from partner to partner is often someone not secure in their own identity. And this ability for intimacy is not just important in a romantic relationship, it's important in all interpersonal relationships, including friends and successful work relationships. People who are not able to form intimate relationships, intimate bonds, close ties, are isolated. They hesitate to connect to other people. They're competitive with other people. They reject people who are different than them. They feel threatened by closeness. Now we're going to introduce another theorist. We talked about Erickson and his theories of social and emotional development. Another theorist who built his work also on Freud and on Erickson is Levinson. And he talks about seasons of adult life. That's the name of his theory. Seasons, time periods. Levinson is very, very interested in transitions and changes from one life phase to the other. And he begins in adulthood and talks about the early adult transitioning from adolescence to adulthood. And Levinson emphasizes that as a young person, each person has to develop a picture of themselves in the future, which he calls your dream. Now, when you stop and think about what is a dream like, when you're sleeping at night and you have a dream, what's that like? It's like a movie, and you're picturing yourself as the star of your own movie. And so not only are you thinking about yourself going places and doing things, but you're seeing yourself there, and you're imagining in your dream phase what it's going to be like. And that's the idea that Levinson has in mind when he talks about building your dream. building your goals and your plans, but a real fleshed out picture of yourself and where you want to be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line. Levinson has developed his theory by interviewing people, talking first to men and then adding women. And he found that in the people he talked to, men and women spoke a little bit differently about their dreams for the future. Men tended to be very career-oriented. They would talk about themselves, finding a place in the world, becoming successful, and there was a great deal of focus on themselves and their own personal success. Women, he called it having split dreams. They talked about personal career success, but they also talked about the importance of family and also wanting to build their own future intimate relationship, have children, build a family. This is probably realistic. Women continue to have more responsibility for child rearing, and women also have to worry about fertility being more limited in the 30s, where men often feel they can marry a younger woman and start a family later, which may lead to these split dreams that women have. Okay. As part of the dream, both men and women think about their work and their career success. And Levinson stressed the importance of a mentor for career success, an older individual in your field who takes you under his or her wing and teaches you about the career, looks out for you, and helps you along the way. Mentors are extremely important for career development. And it's one of the reasons that women, and also people of ethnic minority background, sometimes have difficulty climbing the ladder in a career. Mentors tend to look for people who remind them of their younger selves. And so again, mentors are drawn to people who they see as similar to them, which is why women who want to move up in a job, or members of an ethnic minority group or an immigrant group who want to move up in a job, may have fewer choices in terms of a mentor, or may have to work a little harder to establish a relationship with someone who isn't exactly like them. Remember I said that Levinson is also very interested in transition points. So the transition from adolescence to early adulthood is important. And then he talks about the age 30 transition, that turning point where you're out of your 20s, although 30 is hardly old. Often people begin to think through, wow, I'm about to turn 30. This is a grown-up place. This is a place where I really want to be a little more established than I felt I should be in my 20s. And again, Levinson saw a difference between men and women. For men, they were building their career through their 20s, and now they want to settle down and have a family. Whereas for women, if they were worrying about both, if they were worrying about establishing a family and having children in their 20s, but also a career, they may be less settled at 30. They may feel like they have commitments to the relationship, they have commitments to work, but they haven't given 100% to either one. And so at the age 30 transition, a lot of the women that Levinson talked to expressed this concern of being able to advance in both of these areas of their split dream. Okay, now Vaillant's adaptation to life in men. Because it's a much older theory, Vaillant's work was done quite a while ago, and as the slide points out, he only interviewed men. We're not going to go into great depth about Vaillant. He found very similar things to some of the others, that the men in their 20s talked about concerns about intimacy and relationship, in the 30s wanting to feel success in their career, 40s generativity, looking back, 50s and 60s being keepers of meaning, and in the 70s spirituality and reflection. I'm just reading the slide basically. We're not going to focus too much on that. All right, the social clock. We are going to focus on that. The social clock is a different way of looking at the exact same thing we've just been talking about, but from a different perspective. Erikson, Levinson, Vaillant, who we talked about briefly, all have talk about life as a series of stages. And they talk about people focusing on different aspects of their life which become important to them at different stages of life. When you talk about a stage theory, you're talking about the belief that people everywhere basically have the same set of needs at a particular life period. So adolescents everywhere, according to Erickson, worry about their identity. Young adults everywhere worry about intimacy. The social clock theories argue that when we see people of a certain age focusing on particular aspects of their life, that this isn't driven internally, that people everywhere and at every time would not focus on the same things. Rather, the social clock argues that the things that are important to us at particular ages, whether it be establishing a career in our 30s, whether it be worrying about having a family in our 20s and 30s, that this is driven by society, that society sets this timing in this clock, and that there are expectations for different life events, for different things you ought to be doing in your life or accomplishments in life based on your age in that time, in that society. So the social clock points out things are less rigid now than they were in earlier generations, meaning people have more leeway to do things at different times. In the past, by the time you were 25, you were expected to have had a kid, especially if you're a woman. Today, as we saw, women are waiting longer to have children, and this is more acceptable. However, there is still a clock, there is still a social expectation. And why do people follow these social expectations? Well, number one, it gives us confidence. We like to do what's called social comparison, compare ourselves to other people. And when we make these social comparisons and we match the expectations of society, we feel more confident, like we're doing the right thing. It also gives us social stability. It makes us feel that we fit in with other people of our same age, and it gives us peers who are doing the same thing. If you're 20 and most of your friends are still dating, but you have a baby, then you might feel left out. You can't do the things your friends are doing. Similarly, if all your friends have babies and you're the only one without, again, you feel left out. So you don't feel left out because of your age, you feel left out because of your social clock, your social network and what they're doing at this time. And you feel distressed if you're not following along, or if you feel like you're falling behind your friends, if everyone's married and you're not, if everyone has a job and you don't, if everyone has moved out of their parents' house and you still haven't. Okay, moving on to the next topic, we're going to talk about these intimate relationships and selecting a mate. Now, most people choose someone similar to themselves. That doesn't mean you can't choose someone different from yourself, but it means that most people feel comfortable with people that are very similar to them. Similar how? Similar in education, similar in culture, similar in ethnicity, similar in religion, similar in interests, similar in values. And often the more similarities people have, the more people have in common, the better they get along. Again, can you get along with someone who's different than you? Sure. But most people choose somebody very similar to themselves. There are gender differences in mate selection. Everybody values things that contribute to relationship satisfaction. Both men and women look for someone who's smart, look for someone who's funny, look for somebody who's kind-hearted, look for someone who's intelligent. However, the emphasis tends to be a little different for men and women. And there are some qualities that men put first that women don't put first, and vice versa. For example, women tend to put ambition, meaning wanting to get ahead at work, money, intelligence, and moral character first. It's not like men are saying, I want somebody stupid and lazy and poor with poor moral character. It's not saying that, but it's saying that women put these things first, whereas men put attractiveness and domestic skills, housekeeping, cooking, etc. first. Again, not saying women will say, I want somebody who's ugly and can't cook, but they're not putting it at their top of their list. There are different explanations for this. The evolutionary perspective argues that we do this because of our biology. Women have children one at a time, and when women have children, you're out of commission for a good deal of time. You're pregnant for 9 months, you're nursing for up to a year, and therefore you need somebody to help you financially. And you need somebody of good moral character who's going to stay around. You need somebody who's loyal, who's going to help you while you're not able to do more for them than raise their child. Not that that's not an important contribution, but if you're not bringing in money, you still need them to stay around. And late in the pregnancy, you're not able to bear more children for them. You need them to stay around and wait. Whereas for men, they're very interested in finding someone to have their children. From an evolutionary perspective, you want to pass your genes on. And so for men, attractiveness is another signal of being healthy and being able to bear children. And if you think about the characteristics that men say they find attractive in women, breasts, what do you use them for? Well, men might think about one thing, but evolution is saying take care of the baby. Hips, makes it easier to have a baby once again. And the domestic skills speak for themselves. If the woman's going to stay home and take care of the family while the man goes out and work, you want her to do a good job at that. That's the evolutionary perspective. The social learning view says, okay, our biology doesn't limit us. Women could look for different things. Men could look for different things. But society teaches us to look for these stereotyped traditional roles and attributes. Okay. Attachment and adult romantic relationships. Okay. Attachment theory is something that hopefully you remember from child development, which argued that your attachment to your parents, attachment theory argued particularly your mother, but we've expanded it in more modern thinking to be attachment to your caregivers, to your family. Kids who felt secure and trusting with their caregiver, that this builds what's called a working model for adult relationships. Okay, what's a working model? It's how you think about relationships in your head. It's how you approach relationships. This becomes your habit, your custom, and as an adult, the theory goes, the way you interacted with your parents as a child sets you up for the kinds of relationships you're going to have as an adult. So those who had secure attachment, who felt loved, trusting, secure with their parents, they're comfortable with intimacy. They're not worried that their parents are going to abandon them or not be there for them. They feel secure, and therefore their adult relationships are happy, trusting, and involve close friendships. Avoidant attachment. These were kids who felt they couldn't trust their parents, who felt that their parents were not nurturing, and so they became avoidant. They detached themselves. They became withdrawn and said, you know what, if you're not going to take good care of me, I'm going to ignore you. You ignore me, I ignore you. These are people for whom their working model emphasizes independence and mistrust. I can't trust other people, so I got to take care of myself. And therefore, closeness makes them nervous. And the theory goes that their adult relationships are going to be emotionally distant, without much pleasure, and they may have unrealistic beliefs and expectations about other people. The resistant attachment, that was the clingy, whiny kid, the kid who doesn't trust, doesn't feel secure with their parents, and so they become ultra needy as kids. They're always complaining, always testing to make sure that their parent comes back. These people, their working model becomes seeking love, merging with other people, clingy, needy. I'm always chasing you. And so as an adult, these are people who are high maintenance, who are drama queens or kings. They're jealous. They might seem desperate to hold on to relationships. Okay, so again, this is one theory of how these different relationship styles form. And the theory is that what we learn as children carries through to adulthood. Another theory of adult relationships is Sternberg's triangular theory of love. The triangle, 3 sides, 3 aspects. Another reason that Sternberg chooses the metaphor of the triangle, besides it having three aspects, is that a triangle is a very, very strong figure. If you look at bridges, very often people use triangular shapes in bridges to make it steady, to hold it up. And so the metaphor is that with these three sides, your relationship is stable. Okay, what are the three sides? Intimacy. This is not the kind of intimacy that people talk about when they talk about physical intimacy. When Sternberg talks about intimacy, he's talking about friendship, caring, liking. So there's warmth, tenderness, and concern. Then he talks about passion. Again, this is the sexual attraction. And the third aspect, which this slide doesn't show you very well, no, it doesn't show very well, would be commitment. The decision, that mental decision, yes, we're going to stay together. So you have the intimacy, the friendship, the liking, the passion, you have the physical attraction, and you have the commitment. In general, passion tends to come first. That may not be the best way to start a relationship, but let's face it, dating relationships often start with a physical spark, a physical attraction. Then you date, you get to know each other, and you build intimacy, you build a friendship. And finally, you make a decision to commit. Now, as Sternberg points out, the early part of a relationship, the attraction is strongest. We are attracted to things that are new. We're never as excited as we are at the beginning. Eventually, passion can fade, but hopefully intimacy and commitment build and strengthen so that the relationship can stay together. All right, so how do you maintain a relationship? What are some practical things you can do, some good advice? Very, very straightforward here, but a couple of things I want to clarify. Make time for the relationship. You can't be busy with 1,000 other things and expect the relationship to kind of be waiting for you when you come back. You need to make time. You need to express affection. There have been a lot of research studies done on people who've been together for many, many years, 30, 40, 50 years. These people will always tell you that one thing they do is they make sure to tell their partner that they care, to express their affection. You need to be available when your partner needs you. If you never come through, your partner's going to get disgusted with you and feel uncared for, and they're going to be right. This one is important, constructive communication about problems. You've probably heard the advice that, oh, you should never keep anger to yourself. If you're angry, you should express it. That advice should have a little bit of a qualification to it. If you are upset with your partner, yes, you should say something. But you have to communicate in a positive way, in a constructive way, not a destructive way. If you approach your partner and say, I can't believe how stupid you are, you've got that person's backup. Now they're not listening to anything you say. But if you approach them and say, yesterday you did something that made me very upset, and I'd like to talk with you about it so that we can improve it for the future. That's a whole different approach. Number one, you're talking about how you feel, how what they did made you feel. They can't argue with that. And there's no insult there. You're not attacking. You're saying, let's work this out. So problems should always be communicated in a positive, constructive way. And if you want to scream and yell and curse and say and give insults, don't talk about it then. Take a deep breath. Say, I want to talk to you about this, but I'm very angry now. I'm going to say something I shouldn't. I'm going to come back, and we'll talk about it later. That's a much more mature, a more sensible way to approach it. You should show interest in your partner's life. Even if it's boring, show a little interest in it. Try to find something about it that you're interested in. Confide in your partner. People who don't share anything, who keep secrets, that's a shaky relationship. And you have to forgive. You can't keep bringing the same thing up over and over unless it happens again, in which case, time to work that out. But once it's done, if it isn't repeated, then it's done. Early adult friendships. Okay, again, friends, like partners, we usually pick people similar to ourselves, and we should choose people who enhance our self-esteem and make life more interesting. We should not be choosing people who don't like us, who make us feel bad. We should be seeking out people who make us feel good. Those are the most positive friendships. We need trust, we need intimacy, we need loyalty. Now, social media has changed friendship a little bit. In the past, you actually had to see each other. Now, sometimes younger people, older people, can sit in the computer and that's their social life. On the one hand, social media is popular. I know people who, post up, I'm having a party, everybody come. That's a nice way to open something up. On the other hand, if social media is your only social outlet, you need to stop and think, am I really getting everything I need from this computer and from these sort of distanced relationships? You want to mix it. You want to use social media as a tool, not as the whole friendship. In early adulthood, siblings can become friends. You might have fought as kids, but now that you're both adults or all adults, depending on how many of you there are, the differences in age don't mean as much. When one is 12 and one is 16, you're not on the same page. When one is 20 and one is 24, very similar interests. And so siblings can become friends. Gender and friendship. Same-sex versus other-sex friendships. Okay, first of all, there are gender differences in the types of friendships, as we've mentioned before. Women's friendships are more intimate, not physically intimate, emotionally intimate. Women are more likely to talk about feelings and share. Women's friendships also tend to be that talking kind of friendship, whereas men's are the doing kinds of friendship. In terms of same-sex friendships, despite the fact that we say women do this, men do this, obviously there are huge individual differences, both between people and the kind of friendships they have, and also between our different friendships. Each of us has sort of a different relationship with each friend. And so when people are single, then they tend to confide in friends. When people partner, women will continue to confide in their same-sex friends, whereas men tend to start confiding in their partner. In terms of other sex friendships, meaning men being friends with women, women being friends with men, and not romantic, just friends, less common, although some people are more comfortable with it than others. Women who are educated and employed have more opposite sex friendships because work is a place where you make those kinds of friendships. And work and school are places you make those kinds of friendships. It's good for people of both genders to have at least a few opposite sex friends. Why? Men have the opportunity to have a female style friendship, meaning someone to talk to. And women have the opportunity for a male style friendship. They learn what men think about, talk about, and have the opportunity for some more of those doing friendships. Loneliness. Okay, here's something interesting. Even though young people probably have more social interaction than at any other time in life, they are lonelier than at any other time in life. The peak time of life that people say they're lonely is the late teens and early 20s. Why? It's a transition point. We're leaving school and we're entering a new phase, either college or work. People scatter, people go in different directions, and our friendships are no longer laid out for us, right? You no longer have your elementary school class, your middle school class, your high school class. You've got to go out and find those friends yourself. Another reason that loneliness peaks is because people expect their youth, their late teens, early 20s, to be the craziest, most social time. And so it never quite lives up to those exaggerated, unrealistic expectations. People are more lonely if they have frequent life transitions, if they move a lot, if they switch schools or switch jobs a lot. If they immigrate from one culture to another, being an immigrant can be lonely, especially if you're used to a collectivist, a group-oriented culture, and then you move to a place like the U.S. where it's everyone for themselves. People who separate or divorce or are widowed become lonelier. And of course, if people are insecure, if they don't have great social skills, kind of push people away, those people tend to be lonelier. Okay. The family life cycle. What does this mean? This is sort of a natural progression linked really to a social clock, right, to what's expected in your society, where you do certain things in early adulthood. You're expected to leave home, you're expected to have a relationship, you're expected to have children. In middle adulthood, that's when your children are growing up and getting ready to leave the house and do leave the house. And then in late adulthood, retirement, and eventually widowhood. This is called the family life cycle. Again, you can do these things at different times. Easier to do them on the clock. Leaving home. The average age of leaving home has increased over the last 50 years because of money. It's more expensive to establish yourself in your own home, your own apartment. It's difficult to get established in a job. More education is required. And so people tend to live with their parents longer. More than 50% of people who leave come back briefly. I try out an apartment, job didn't work out, the apartment didn't work out, the home didn't work out, the relationship didn't work out, I come home. Culture and ethnicity, as well as socioeconomic status, have an impact on when you leave home, both to push you out and to pull you in. Some cultures really don't believe in leaving home until you're married. Other cultures push you out. Socioeconomic status, education, and money. On the one hand, if your family has money and space, a big enough home, there's room for you. There's no problem for you to stay. On the other hand, and they may be able to help you out in establishing you in a new home. On the other hand, if your parents have a very small place and they're poor, they may need you to move out or stay and contribute to the home. Parents, in general, are committed to helping their children move into adult roles. It's a rare parent who says, no, I want to keep you forever. And obviously, it's healthier to want to move your kids along. Trends in marriage. Similarly, just like we leave home later, people are marrying later. But 70% of people marry at least once. Most people want to get married. It seems to be something that attracts us as much as we complain. However, 30% never marry, and 50% of all marriages end in divorce. And so there's an awful lot of people at any point in time who are single, who are living together, or who get divorced and say, this is it for me. And there's a trend towards the legalization of same-sex marriage. Many states now say it's legal, and this appears to be something that's slowly becoming accepted across the country. Okay, styles of marriage. The traditional marriage is what we think of as maybe the more old-fashioned view. Traditional, what we've always done. That's what traditional means. This relationship has a clear division of roles. Women care for the husband, the children in the home, and men are in charge of the household and bring in the money. In general, the person who brings in the money to a relationship has the power in the relationship. And so in a traditional relationship, the man who's working is the head of the household. In an egalitarian relationship, the partners look at themselves as equal, and so they try to share authority, meaning the power. They try to share the income, meaning they both want to work, and then they share household chores and child rearing. Most well-educated women these days say this is what they want, although again, individual differences. Now, on your review sheet for the test, I mentioned another kind of marriage that's not in your book, not up here on the slide, called the junior partnership. This is not ever something that people set out to have, but it's what happens when people set out to have an egalitarian relationship, and then after the children are born, the person who earns less, which is often the woman, reduces hours, quits the job, goes part-time, or in general, the couple decide we're going to emphasize the job that brings in more money, which is generally the man's job, but not 100% of the time. And so the person who's bringing in less money, the person who we've decided can afford to quit their job, okay, so the person who is putting less emphasis on the job takes on more and more of the household responsibilities and the childcare responsibilities, And then because they're bringing in less of the money, they have less of the power. And this becomes a junior partnership. Because all of these people set out saying they were going to have an egalitarian relationship, there tends to be a lot of dissatisfaction in these relationships. Now, which relationship do you think would be the happiest, the egalitarian or the traditional? Well, most people correctly assume that women are happier on average in egalitarian relationships. But most people incorrectly assume that men are more happy on average in traditional relationships. It turns out that both men and women report more happiness in egalitarian relationships, probably because these are relationships with less conflict. If both partners are happy, then the marriage is better. Okay. As we can see on this chart, housework hours, women continue to have more housework hours across different cultures and different countries. And although women who stay home do much more work than women who are working, women who are working nonetheless tend to do similar amounts of work, to do more work than men who are working. Even if both partners are working, the woman is still doing more. Okay, so again, we talked about happy relationships. Again, we're coming to factors related to being satisfied with your relationship. Happy in a marriage, stability in a marriage or a long-term relationship. Age at marriage. Getting married when you're a little bit older, when you're at least in your mid to late 20s, is better than getting married very young. It can work if you get married very young, but obviously your identity is not set, you're not so sure what you want, and there's a lot of financial pressure. So if you wait until you're established financially, things are going to go better. Timing of the first pregnancy. If the first pregnancy happens right away in a marriage, that puts a lot of strain. You should be together at least a year, get to know each other, make sure this is stable before the first pregnancy. You need a good relationship to extended family. The things people say they fight about the most are money, kids, and extended family. The parents, the siblings interfering, not being happy, and causing problems in the relationship. The marital patterns in your family. If your parents were happily married, you have an example of how a happy marriage goes, you're more likely to have one. Doesn't mean you can't have one if your parents were not together, but it does influence future behavior. Obviously, financial stability, having a job, having fewer outside family responsibilities, having a positive personality, and having a positive bias of your partner's attributes, meaning you think your partner's just great. Seeing the best in your partner. Okay, partner abuse. It's committed by both men and women, but because men are stronger, women are more likely to get hurt. Men, however, are often embarrassed to report it, so it may be an underreported thing. It is very common to have cycles of violence followed by remorse, feeling sorry. Somebody, the abusive partner, flying off the handle, screaming, yelling, throwing things, hitting their partner, and then, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. Alcohol, drugs fuel this. Personality problems fuel this. Family circumstances, stressors, coming from an abusive relationship, all make this worse. It's very, very hard to treat and improve an abusive relationship. Sadly, most of the time, the only solution is to leave. However, if there's family therapy, if there are services for the abuser and the abuser really wants to improve, especially if there's alcohol involved or drugs and they can get rid of that addiction, there's some hope for improvement. But it's a rare case, sadly. Okay. This is just a slide with assaults in different countries. We're not going to emphasize that right now. Okay, trends in having children. Fewer people have children, even when they're married, than in the past. Now, 70% of married couples do have children, so that's certainly the majority. But again, it's not everybody, and it has become much more acceptable to have a relationship and not have children. Being childless has become more acceptable socially. Often you hear people say, oh, it's selfish not to have children. I want to comment on that. Having children is a big responsibility, and we should do it right. And so if a person does not wish to have children, they know they don't wish to have children, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing selfish about it. We have plenty of people on the planet. There are no requirements that everybody do their share to have more people. The be fruitful and multiply, that was in the past. The planet is full. If 30% of couples want to not have children, Earth will do just fine. It is not selfish to know yourself and know what you want. But if you do want children, then it is a terrific experience. But again, only when those kids are wanted. There's more delay in having the first child so that people can establish themselves financially and afford to take care of the child. And there's a decline in the average family size. It is now the average is about 2 children per woman. In the past, it was much more common to have larger families. Now it's much less common, and having 1 child is also more common than it used to be. All right, why have children? There are advantages to children. There are disadvantages to children. The disadvantages can sometimes be more obvious than the advantages, but the advantages are very real. The disadvantages, they're expensive. They're a lot of work. You have rollover load. They're a 24/7 commitment, so you lose a lot of your freedom. It is almost impossible to truly be the only person responsible for kids. Single parents must have help. You cannot be on call 24/7. And they impinge on a career. Obviously, if you want to be super high-powered in a career, you need backup. A child is sick, you can't just call a very high-powered job and say, I'm not coming. And so those are the disadvantages. So why have them? For warmth and affection, having a happy family, having kids is a very, very enriching experience. There's a lot of emotional satisfaction. Kids can be fun and stimulating. You do fun things together as a family. There's really only so many times you can go out dancing, go out to dinner, go out to a club, go out to brunch. So having a focus for your life around raising kids and coming up with activities to do together as a family can be fun and stimulating and warm. Kids are a learning experience. They mature you. They help you to grow as a human being. Caring and being responsible for someone else helps you know yourself and helps you be more mature. People want to feel a sense of accomplishment in raising children, and people want to carry on a legacy, to know that after they're gone, some of their DNA is still on Earth. But again, unless you see those advantages, don't do it. If all you see are the disadvantages, and the advantages don't sound that great, don't do it. If the advantages sound great, do it, but make sure you're ready when you do it. Often people don't plan very much to have children. And yet we are at a point where you can plan to have children, and you should plan. You should think it through. They should not be the result of 1 glass of wine too many. You definitely want to make sure you're ready. The transition to parenthood. Okay, parental roles. After the first birth, couples often become a little more traditional. That's because the woman had the baby. And often she's breastfeeding the baby. She's responsible for that child immediately after the birth. And then the couple can kind of tend, without even thinking about it, to drift into more traditional division of labor. By the second birth, you're used to it, you know what you're doing, the father feels more confident, the mother feels more confident, and you can drift back into a more egalitarian mode. That's kind of common. There is typically a very small decline in relationship satisfaction right after the birth. Everybody's tired. Nobody has time. Nothing too romantic about a baby waking you up in the middle of the night. Nothing too romantic about your vomiting and your diarrhea. And so, therefore, at first, people have less time for each other, less time for the relationship. But if both people pitch in and share in the child care and act mature, it predicts happiness. The relationship can stay together and continue to be happy. And again, once the baby sleeps through the night, everybody feels better. The transition is easier if you're a little bit older. When you're very, very young, you have fewer resources, you have fewer personal resources, you're not as mature. Parenthood transition is harder. If you're a little bit older, you're more established in your job, you have more life experience, your relationship is stronger, you have more money, you know what you want, you've planned it out. It's an easier transition. Parenting. With young children, you must work together as a team. And that goes for a couple parenting or any adults who are involved with the child. Adults have to work together. If the adults do not support each other, if the child knows, well, if I ask mom and she says no, I can ask dad or grandma and they'll say yes, you're in trouble. You need to be a united front and you need to pitch in with the child. The challenges are for people who don't have good social support. That's very hard. People who have trouble finding good child care, very hard. In adolescence, there's a lot of change. That tends to be the low point in a relationship when kids hit adolescence. There's a lot of fighting over discipline, a lot of fighting over money because adolescents are gosh darn expensive and want lots of things. There's challenges in terms of the negotiation of role, and that's why there's the dip, meaning going downhill in terms of family satisfaction. The good news is you get past adolescence, and if you work together as a team again, you'll get past it. Kids grow up, they become more mature, things get easier. Parent education. We go to school for our job, but we don't generally go to school in order to be certified. Yep, you're ready to be a parent. But there are lots of ways to learn, and people who do try to learn about parenting are happier, and they do better. If you know more, you do better. There's all sorts of ways to get parent education. Yes, you could take formal classes. You can read books. You can go on the website. You can read magazines. You also can work with social networks and social media. They can be informal, people you meet in the neighborhood, people you know, friends, and now there are all sorts of online networks where you can join and trade advice. Singlehood. 8 to 10% of people remain single for life. We said that 30% of people never get married, but obviously some of those people cohabit, live together without ever getting married. 8 to 10 people remain single for life, never live together with someone of, the partner, and they never marry. There are gender differences. Women are more likely to stay single than men. Why? Well, in part there are more women out there than men, a little bit of a larger number of women than men. Men have more to choose from because in our society it's socially acceptable for an older man to marry a younger woman or a woman his own age, whereas women are supposed to only marry someone older, and as men age, there are fewer men. Women live longer than men. More well-educated women tend to be single. Again, the stereotype is a well-educated woman has to find a man who's equal or more educated. Similarly, men with low education have problems because women are looking for someone who is equally or more educated. So it's the more educated women and less educated men who may have trouble with finding a partner. African Americans tend to stay single longer for a variety of probably cultural, historical reasons. And stressful periods are the late 20s and the mid-30s in particular for women, where other people start pushing you. When are you going to settle down? When are you going to get married? When are you going to find somebody? So these are periods of time when if you're single, You're getting pressure to do something different. But it's becoming more and more acceptable to leave people alone and let them stay single if that's what they choose. Cohabitation, living together without getting married. All right, is it a preparation for marriage or is it an alternative to marriage? Now, interestingly, people look at it as a preparation. They say, oh, if we live together first, we're going to get to know each other better and we'll have a better marriage. But it turns out that in America in particular, people who live together and then marry are more likely to get divorced than people who do not live together before marriage. This difference doesn't exist in Western Europe, where cohabiting has become very common without bothering to get married, or deciding not bothering is probably the wrong word, choosing often, we just don't want to make that legal arrangement. Why is this difference? Hard to say. It's possible that when people live together and then decide suddenly to get married, maybe they're doing it because there's been a change in the relationship, like a baby, and then that can cause stress, or maybe there's been some instability in the relationship. Another reason might be a religious one, that North Americans tend to be more religious than Western Europeans. And so if North Americans live together before marriage, they're less religious and therefore more accepting of divorce, whereas people who wait tend to be more religious and therefore less accepting of divorce. That's a possibility. Childlessness. As we mentioned, it's okay to be childless. Voluntary childlessness usually means somebody is committed to a job. Often that's a more educated person with a more responsible job. The negative stereotypes are weakening, but they're still there, and about 20% of women remain childless. On the other hand, involuntary childlessness, meaning I want children, but I can't have them, either because I'm infertile or because I'm not with a partner and I'm uncomfortable being a single parent, then that can lead to unhappiness. Obviously, you're not getting something that you very much want. Divorce rates have stabilized since the 80s. What happened was divorce rates used to be low because it was very hard to get divorced. And it was very hard for women to support themselves when they were single, and so they would fight to stay married. Once the divorce laws became more lenient, it became easier to get a divorce, and once jobs opened up for women, divorce rates rose. Now people who want the divorce can get them. Unhappy marriages now end in divorce, whereas in the past people might have just stayed together for economic or legal reasons. But since the 1980s, it kind of stabilized, and as many people as want to get divorced were getting divorced. It hasn't climbed. About 45% of U.S. marriages end in divorce, and about half of the people who divorce remarry, and people who remarry right after they got divorced, in other words, on the rebound, right away grabbing, jumping into another relationship, those are 10% higher divorce rates, so it's 55% of those marriages. The most common times to divorce, either within the first 7 years of marriage, oops, I made a mistake, or I have young children and there's too much stress, or in midlife, especially when you're fighting over adolescence. What causes divorce? Ineffective problem solving. You can't solve your problems together. You grow apart. You're living separate lives. You don't have all that much in common. You're having major stressors, money problems, substance abuse problems, cheating, infidelity. Background factors. You got married too young. You have a religious clash. You were divorced before, and so you're more likely to get divorced again. You have a family background with divorce, where again, your earlier examples are that divorce is acceptable. Socioeconomic status. Currently, lower socioeconomic status. People probably who can afford less to get divorced because of those stressors of money are more likely to get divorced. People with more education, higher, better jobs, more likely to stay together. And of course, a clash in gender roles and expectations between the two partners leads to marital strife. What are the consequences of divorce? Well, whether you're thrilled to get rid of your partner or not, divorce is traumatic. It's a huge life change. There can be positive outcomes, restarting your life, doing things that you felt you couldn't do with a partner you weren't happy with, but also negative outcomes, particularly financial. It's very hard to recover from splitting all your stuff and all your money in half. After 2 years, things begin to stabilize again. At first, your social networks were disrupted. You split up who gets the friends, especially if you had a lot of friends who you both were friends with. Anxiety, depression, reaction to the stress. Traditional women tend to be more upset. They were hoping to stay home and be housewives, and now they can't. Non-custodial fathers can be upset. You didn't get custody of the children. You don't see them as much as you want to. Those are stressors. Finding a new partner obviously makes you feel happier, and men tend to gain more from that than women, probably because men tend to confide in their partner rather than in friendship circles, and men also rely on women for housekeeping, etc. Most people remarry within 4 years of divorce if they're going to remarry, men sooner than women, partly because they can. It's easier for men to remarry, and partly because, again, they're anxious to get back into that being taken care of kind of setup. However, remarriages are vulnerable to breakups, especially if you got remarried for practical reasons. I'm a parent, I've broken up, I need a mother, father for the children. That's not a reason to get together. Or financially, it's hard, or I hate to be single, I got to find somebody quick. These are bad reasons to get married, and so it can be a shaky relationship. If you carry over negative patterns from the other marriage, if you didn't learn, you're going to make the same mistakes. Step families are stressful. It is very, very hard to blend children. A lot of adults don't think that through, and they don't put enough emphasis on the kids and on learning to live together and helping the kids adjust to step parents, and that stress can take 3 to 5 years. Education, counseling can help, but if you're not patient, then if things don't feel good within a year or two, you may give up when it takes longer than that to blend two families. Okay. Different styles of parenthood. Step parents, never married, single parents, gay and lesbian parents. Here's the thing. We often say that these are not going to be good parents. The best thing is a mother and a father who got married. Yes, it is always better to have 2 adults involved than one, not because you can't be a good parent as a single parent, but rather just because of the work. It's easier with 2 adults. Because of the money, it's easier with 2 adults. But can all of these parents be great parents? Of course they can. And the evidence suggests that gay and lesbian parents are parents. They're good parents and bad parents. They are almost always parents by choice, right? Very few accidents if your partner is a same-sex partner. These are people who went out and adopted or did some sort of fertility intervention. And so these are people who planned the parenting. And planned parenting is always better than unplanned parenting. So gay and lesbian families tend to be healthy families, just like more typical families. Stepmothers have a harder time than stepfathers. Why? Because mothers tend to be the ones who have the most childcare responsibilities, and so children are more wary of somebody trying to step into their mother's role. Fathers often have that fun role. Oh, let's go out and play, let's go to the movies. And so stepfathers have an easier time bonding with the kids sometimes than stepmothers, especially because kids will feel less disloyal being nice to the new woman to the new man than they will to the new woman. You don't want to kind of replace your mother. Relationship quality varies a lot. It depends on the maturity of the adults. And unfortunately, because of the stress, higher divorce rate. 11% of American children live in never married single parent homes. African American women It's much more common family pattern than among other ethnic groups. And African American women tend to rely on extended family to fill in that helper role, that can't do it by yourself role. If a woman is educated and has money, it's a lot easier to be a single parent. If you're a single parent, you don't have a lot of education and you don't have a lot of money, that's super rough. The more involvement by the father, if the biological father or a stepfather is reliable and helpful, then that is helpful to the single parent. Again, gay and lesbian parents, about 20 to 35% of gay women, 5 to 15% of men have children. Sometimes they are children of past heterosexual relationships, or they're adopted, or using sperm donors, etc. There are no differences cognitively or socially from peers who have heterosexual parents because these are families of choice. However, stigma is a concern. The biggest problem to gay kids is other people picking on that. So very important, again, for schools to make sure that this doesn't go on. Okay, moving on to career development. It's common to want to change your job a lot in your 20s. You probably didn't choose or get the very best job right out of the gate. Your first job's an entry-level job. Entry-level jobs have a lot of drawbacks. You're not earning a lot. You're the bottom of the barrel, on the bottom of the totem pole, and so whenever there's jobs that nobody wants, you'll get them. So there's some disappointment. People switch around a lot. If the national economy is down and it's hard to get your first job, that can delay a person in starting out. And so you have to adjust your expectations to your opportunities. You're not going to be the head of the company. You're not going to earn a lot of money in your first job. And so eventually younger people realize, okay, this is what I'm going to get. This is how I work my way up. And you look for effective mentoring to help you succeed. Challenges to women's career development. A discontinuous career path, meaning you leave for child rearing or family care. And so if you're not working continuously, you don't advance as quickly as someone who works continuously, who doesn't stop. There's a gender gap in salary. Women earn less than men. We had that on our discussion board. Why? And sometimes it's prejudice. Sometimes it's the discontinuous career path. And sometimes it's job choices. Women tend to choose professions that pay a little bit less. Women are more likely to choose teaching, the helping profession, social work. Men are more likely to do the engineering, accounting, business. Women feel low self-efficacy, meaning self-efficacy means I think I can. I feel like I'll be successful. They worry that if they try for a male-dominated field like science, engineering, business, they won't do as well. There's gender stereotyping and fewer mentoring opportunities for women to break into these higher-paying fields. Same thing with ethnic minorities. Number one, there's racial bias. Harder to find a job, harder to move up and be promoted. And so ethnic minority women face double discrimination. The more self-confidence and self-efficacy you have, the better. The more you're able to be assertive in finding a mentor, meaning mentors are less likely to come to you if you don't look like them. And so you need to reach out. You need to put yourself out there. Think about it. A lot of people are shy about approaching a mentor. But if you were in a career and somebody approached you, a young person, and said, wow, I really look up to you. I see you as a goal I'd like to work towards. What your job is a goal I'd like to work towards in my future. I would really appreciate your help and advice. Who wouldn't be flattered? If they're not flattered, they're idiots and you've picked the wrong person to mentor. But if you ask a few people, you will definitely get someone who's interested in working with you. Okay. Work-family balance. In a dual earner couple with children, there's a lot of role overload, meaning too busy, too much, work, kids, etc. If women have low status jobs, or men have low status jobs, that's harder. Why? It's harder to take time off. You're often punching a clock. You're working by the hour. So if you miss work, you miss pay. People with higher status jobs tend to have more flexibility. If you can find a workplace that has time flexibility, that has benefits that help you with your home and your work life, like effective childcare or emergency childcare, or things that are called employee assistance programs, where you can come in and get referrals from someone who works at the company. These things help with work-family balance. Okay, that's it.